They gave me until Friday to tear down my fence or start paying a fine that would bleed me dry by the week. And the strangest part wasn't the letter, it was the way they said it, like the decision had already been made, like I didn't really exist in the equation, like I was just another problem to be managed. And if that had been the whole story, I probably would have just taken the thing down, swallowed the cost, cursed under my breath, moved on like most people do when they realize fighting the system costs more than losing to it. But that's not what happened, because 3 days later, I saw a survey crew standing at the entrance of the neighborhood, not measuring my fence, measuring theirs. And that's when something in my gut told me this wasn't going to end the way they thought it would. So let me back up a little. I moved into Brook Hollow Estates at the start of spring, one of those quiet, HOA-run neighborhoods just outside a mid-sized town where everything looks neat from the outside, trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, rules posted like commandments. You know the type. Not terrible, just controlled. I wasn't looking for drama, honestly. I'd spent the better part of a decade working long hours, saving what I could, finally got myself into a place where I could afford a small home with a yard, nothing fancy. But it was mine, and that mattered more than anything. The backyard was the selling point, wide enough for a dog I didn't have yet, a garden I told myself I'd start, and just enough privacy that I could sit out there in the evenings without feeling like I was living inside someone else's window. Only problem was there was no fence. Now, in most places, that's not a big deal. You just put one up. But in an HOA neighborhood, everything becomes a process. Forms, approvals, measurements, colors even. Still, I did it right. Every step. I pulled the property line from the county records, checked it against the deed, even double-checked the markers that were still visible from the original lot survey. I wasn't guessing, I wasn't eyeballing. I knew exactly where that boundary sat. 6 cedar panels, clean, simple, nothing flashy. Cost me about $20 to $100 out of pocket, plus a couple long weekends putting it up myself. By the time I finished, it looked like it had always been there, like it belonged. And for about 3 weeks, everything was quiet. Then the letter showed up. Plain envelope, HOA stamp in the corner, the kind of thing you almost don't open right away because you already know it's not going to be good. Violation notice. I remember reading it once, then again, then a third time, slower, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense if I gave them enough chances. According to them, my fence wasn't on my property. It was encroaching onto HOA-owned common land. And not only that, I had until Friday to remove it or face a daily fine of $150. $150 per day. I actually laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd, like being told you owe rent on your own living room. So I did what anyone would do. I gathered my paperwork. Permit approval, stamped and signed. County assessor's map. Copy of my deed. Even photos from when I installed the posts, showing exactly where everything lined up. I wasn't going in there to argue. I was going in there to clear up what had to be a mistake. The HOA meeting was held in this small clubhouse near the entrance. Low ceiling, fluorescent lights, folding chairs arranged like a room that expected conflict more often than conversation. There were maybe 6 board members sitting up front, and right in the center was a guy named Victor Hale, mid-50s, pressed shirt, the kind of posture that said he was used to being listened to. He didn't look at me when I walked in, not at first, just kept flipping through a stack of papers like he already knew which one mattered and which ones didn't. When it was my turn, I stepped up, laid everything out in front of him, neat, organized, easy to follow. I think there's been a mix-up, I said, calm, respectful. The fence is within my property line. These are the documents. He slid the top sheet back toward me without even glancing down. You're in violation, he said flatly, like he was reading from memory, not making a judgment. I blinked, just for a second. I understand that's what the notice says, but if you look at the map, he cut me off. Our property manager has already filed the boundary assessment. I remember that exact phrase, boundary assessment, like it carried more weight than everything I had in front of him. So you're saying these don't matter? I asked, tapping the stack of documents. He leaned back slightly, finally looking at me. Not angry, not loud, just dismissive. They don't override what's on file with us. There was a pause after that. One of those quiet moments where you expect someone else in the room to step in, to say maybe we should take a closer look, but no one did. Instead, another board member cleared her throat and added, almost casually, if the fence isn't removed by Friday, the daily fine will begin, and there's also a $300 administrative fee being added to your account. Wait, added now? Yes, she said, already writing something down. Processing costs. Processing. Like I was a form, not a person. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Not because I didn't understand what they were saying, but because I did, and it didn't make sense. Then Victor gave me this small, tight smile, the kind people use when they think a situation is already settled. You can take the fence down, he said, or we'll continue billing until you do. And that was it. Meeting over. Decision made. No discussion. I walked out of that room feeling something shift, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, steady realization settling in under everything else. Because up until that point, I was just a homeowner trying to fix a misunderstanding. But the second they dismissed those documents without even looking, the second they decided the outcome before the conversation, that's when it stopped being about a fence. And they had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't go home angry. Not the kind of loud anger where you slam doors or start making calls. It was quieter than that. Heavier. The kind that sits in your chest and just stays there while your brain starts lining things up, piece by piece, asking one simple question over and over. How are they so sure? Because that was the part that didn't add up, not the accusation, not even the fine. It was the confidence. The way Victor didn't even glance at the documents, like he didn't need to, like whatever they had on file wasn't just different from mine, it was, in his mind, untouchable. And I've seen that before. Years ago, before I ever thought about buying a house, before Brook Hollow, before any of this. I worked as a licensed land surveyor for a county engineering firm. 9 years of it, long days in the field, longer nights behind a desk double-checking numbers that didn't tolerate mistakes. Because when you get a boundary wrong, it doesn't just sit on paper. It becomes a problem people live inside. Lines on a map don't look like much until someone builds on the wrong side of them. I don't talk about that part of my life much, not because I'm hiding it, just because it doesn't usually matter. But that night, sitting at my kitchen table with that violation notice in front of me, it mattered again. So I pulled out my laptop. Not to argue, not to complain, but to check. First thing I did was go back further than I had before, not just the assessor's map I used for the fence, but the original subdivision records, the ones filed when Brook Hollow was first carved out of whatever land it used to be. That's where it started. I found the original plat map, scanned, a little faded around the edges, but still clear enough. Lot lines, easements, utility corridors, everything drawn the way it was meant to be before anything was built on top of it. Then I pulled the county GIS overlay, the modern version, the one most people rely on now, clean, color-coded, easy to read, and I layered it over the original plat. After that, I grabbed my own deed description, the legal wording, bearings and distances, the stuff most homeowners never read past the first line because it looks like a different language. Free sources. Same land. They should have matched. At first glance they did. Lot lines lined up, measurements were consistent, nothing jumped out as wrong. And for a second, I actually thought maybe I'd missed something. Maybe the HOA's assessment had picked up on a detail I overlooked. But then I zoomed in. Not on my property, on the entrance. There's this decorative brick wall at the front of the neighborhood. You've probably seen something like it before, name of the subdivision carved into a stone plaque, landscaping around it, lights that come on at night. It's meant to make the place feel established, like it's been there forever. I never paid much attention to it, just drove past it like everyone else. But when I lined up the plat map with the GIS overlay, something felt off. It wasn't obvious, not at full scale, but the more I zoomed in, the more the edges didn't quite sit where they should. So I pulled out a measuring tool, digital first. Then I cross-checked the bearings manually, just to be sure I wasn't chasing a software glitch. And that's when I saw it. The wall wasn't on the boundary line. It was over it. Not by feet. Not something dramatic you'd notice from the street, but enough. 14 inches. 14 inches into land that, according to the original plat and every deed that followed, didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to the homeowners. I leaned back in my chair and just stared at the screen for a minute. Not because I didn't understand what I was looking at, but because I did, and once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. 30-plus years that wall had been sitting there, and nobody had questioned it. Not the board, not the property managers, not even the developers after the fact. It had just become accepted reality. And now they were telling me my fence was the problem. I didn't rush into anything. That's one thing surveying teaches you real fast. You don't move on a single data point, no matter how convincing it looks. So the next morning, I went out there myself. I still had my equipment, not the full setup I used to work with, but enough. GPS-grade receiver, calibrated, accurate within a fraction of an inch if you give it time to settle. I started at my property line first, just to confirm what I already knew. Corner marker, exactly where it should be. Fence line dead on. No encroachment. Not even close. Then I walked up to the entrance. It was early, quiet. Just a couple cars passing through. Nobody paying attention to what I was doing. I set up near the base of the wall, let the receiver lock in, watched the numbers stabilize, then I took my first reading. Then another. Then a third from a different angle, just to eliminate any doubt. Every single one came back the same. 14 inches. I actually let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Not relief, not exactly, more like confirmation. Because at that point, this wasn't a suspicion anymore, it was evidence. And evidence changes things. I spent the rest of that day documenting everything: photos, coordinates, reference points tied back to the original plat. I wasn't just proving a point, I was building a record, something that could stand on its own without me explaining it. By the time I finished, I had enough to put together a formal encroachment report, the kind I used to file when disputes actually went to court. Clear, precise, no emotion, just facts. Where the boundary is supposed to be. Where the structure actually sits. And the difference between the two. 14 inches doesn't sound like much until you attach it to liability. Because here's the thing most people don't realize. When an HOA builds on land it doesn't own, it's not just a mistake, it's exposure. Legal exposure. Financial exposure. The kind that can sit quietly for decades and then suddenly cost a lot of people a lot of money. I printed the report, certified copies, signatures, everything done by the book, and then I sent it in two directions. One to the county land records office, because if there's a discrepancy tied to recorded plats, they don't ignore it. And one to the HOA's registered attorney. Not the board, not Victor, the attorney, because that's who actually understands what something like this means. Then I waited. Not long, but long enough. About 2 weeks in, I got confirmation from the county. They were opening a title discrepancy review. That alone was enough to put pressure on the situation, but what I didn't expect was how fast things started to move after that. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. So I did. Is this Daniel Reeves? The voice on the other end asked, controlled, careful. It is. There was a brief pause, just enough to feel intentional. This is Victor Hale. And just like that, the tone of the entire situation shifted. For a second, I didn't say anything, not because I was surprised to hear his voice, but because I was trying to hear the difference in it. And there was one subtle, but there, less certainty, more calculation, like he was choosing each word a little more carefully than before. Daniel, he said, clearing his throat slightly. We've had a chance to review some new information regarding your property. New information, that's how he put it. Not your report, not the discrepancy, definitely not. We were wrong. Just new information. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch for half a second longer than necessary. Yeah, I said calm. I figured you might. Another pause, shorter this time. The board is prepared to resolve the violation. He continued, voice steady but no longer dismissive. We're willing to remove the fine, refund the administrative fee, and update the record to reflect that your fence is compliant. There it was. Compliant. Same word they could have used 2 weeks earlier if they'd bothered to look at the documents sitting right in front of them. I glanced over at the copy of my report still sitting on the table, pages neat, precise, undeniable, and for a moment, I thought about how easily this could have gone differently. How most people would have taken the fence down by now just to stop the bleeding. And the wall? I asked. That's when the tone shifted again, not back to arrogance, not quite, but something tighter. That matter is under internal review, he said, carefully neutral. It's a separate issue. I couldn't help it. I smiled a little, not out of spite, just recognition. Separate issue. 14 inches sitting on land they didn't own, and somehow that was separate. Is it? I said, not raising my voice, just letting the question hang there. Another pause, longer this time. We're handling it, he replied finally. Of course they were. Because now they had to. I let out a slow breath, then leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, not aggressive, not confrontational, just present. I'm glad to hear the violations being dropped, I said. But I want it documented, meeting minutes, written confirmation, everything. You'll have it, he said quickly, almost too quickly. And the refund? It will be processed. Timeline. A few business days. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. All right, I said. Then we're good. Another small pause, like he expected me to say more. Maybe push further, maybe make it harder than it needed to be, but I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't need to. The balance had already shifted. We ended the call there, short, clean, no unnecessary words. And for the first time since that letter showed up in my mailbox, everything was quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet. A few days later, I got the email, official letterhead, formal language, the kind that tries to sound like it's always been reasonable. Violation, rescinded. Fine, removed. Administrative fee, refunded. Fence, compliant. All of it documented in the meeting minutes, just like I asked. No apology, not directly, but that wasn't the point. Because if you read between the lines, the apology was there, buried under policy language and careful phrasing, exactly where people like that prefer to keep it. I printed the email anyway, not because I needed it anymore, but because I wanted a record, something physical, proof that the version of events they tried to push at the beginning wasn't the one that held up in the end. A week after that, I drove past the entrance again, same brick wall, same sign, same landscaping. Nothing had changed on the surface. But now when I looked at it, I didn't just see a neighborhood marker. I saw 14 inches. 14 inches of assumption, of nobody checking, of something being wrong for so long that it just became accepted truth. And I wondered how many decisions had been made off that same kind of confidence, how many letters sent, how many fines issued, based on information nobody ever bothered to question. My fence is still standing, by the way. Exactly where it's always been, straight, level, right on the line it was supposed to be on from day one. There's still under review, last I heard. The county's process hadn't wrapped yet, and depending on how it goes, that wall might not be as permanent as it looks. And that's the part that sticks with me the most, not the win, not the refund, not even the moment Victor called. It's how close this came to ending differently. Because if I didn't have that background, if I didn't know how to read those maps, how to verify those lines, I probably would have trusted their version of things. I would have taken the fence down, paid the fee, and never known that the real problem wasn't on my side of the boundary. And that's what gets me. Not the mistake. Mistakes happen, but the certainty. The way it was delivered, like there was no room for question, no space for discussion, just compliance. So now I'm curious. If you were in that position, would you have fought it? Or would you have taken the fence down and moved on? And more importantly, when something official tells you you're wrong, how often do you stop and ask? Based on what? Drop a comment. I actually want to know where people land on this. Because situations like this happen more than you'd think, just not everyone catches them in time.